Good morning everyone. In this video we're going to be looking at how to develop the art of landscape looking. And this video is the first video in the second module of my Patreon course called Take Your Landscape Painting to the Next Level. And following on from this, I will be expanding on these ideas in a number of forthcoming lessons. But I wanted to make this particular video not just available on Patreon, but also on YouTube, because I think it represents perhaps one of the most important ideas to help us improve our landscape painting. What I'm going to do in the video is describe what I mean by landscape looking, and then demonstrate this by looking at a number of my paintings that I've done over the years and showing you how this concept of landscape looking has been so foundational to my work. And if you stay with me, we're just going to take a quick walk down the lane. It's actually a beautiful day outside. It's crisp, it's clear, and I'm going to show you how this idea of landscape looking works in practice. Because the whole point of this video is to try and give you an insight into the way my mind works and perhaps how you can engage your observation and your thinking when you're outside in the landscape too. Now, the second module of my Patreon course is entitled The Challenge of Landscape Painting. Let me tell you what that challenge is. For me, the challenge of landscape painting is being able to communicate your feelings and your experience of being in the landscape while you're translating an unlimited, spacious, three-dimensional subject into something that is a constrained two-dimensional image. That is actually what you are doing as a landscape painter. Now, I went through a phase when I was starting off as a landscape painter and painting in watercolour and drawing and sketching, where I realised that the body of work that I was putting together was just a sort of incoherent collection of random ideas. It just seemed to me that it was largely a mismatch of different ideas, different styles. I'd been copying the styles or trying to copy the styles of other artists, and I'd been predominantly inspired by the photographs from books that landscape photographers had taken, where they'd done all the hard work for me in terms of composition and lighting, and it was just for me to make a painted copy of it. And I got to a point where I thought, well, my technical skills are actually quite good, and they weren't too bad. I mean, there was a lot of room for improvement, but what was missing was any sort of artistic quality or identity to that collection of work. There was a large gap between what I considered to be technically reasonably good paintings to anything approaching a body of work that I felt pleased with or proud of. How could I get from that place to the place that I wanted to go? Well, the missing piece, or the bridge if you like, to take me from where I was to where I wanted to go was subject familiarity. And in our case, that's the landscape. In the previous module, we talked about the importance of being familiar and connected to our subjects. And this was an ingredient that was missing from my work. There is a way that you can become familiar with your subject, the landscape or the landscapes that you like to paint, and that is to develop the art of landscape looking. Now, you may be thinking that I've missed a more obvious bridge to get me to my destination, which is perhaps to take more tutorials or to attend more courses or buy new brushes, buy new paints, read more books, use different paper, whatever it is. Those will have some importance in improving your technique, but developing the art of landscape looking, that's where the real art is. That's where you develop your artistic sensibilities. And the reason why this is rarely talked about and it's rarely taught is because it often gets chalked down as this idea of talent. It's something that you've either got or you haven't got. And talent is a rather intangible, nebulous concept. Trying to pin talent down is rather like putting a vest on an octopus. It's just rather difficult to do. And so what we do is we just go, oh, well, you know, he's very talented or she's got an incredible talent for whatever it is. And I'm not going to be able to attain that because I don't have that talent. Well, there may be an element of that, but I don't believe I have any more talent than any of you. Yes, I may have an aptitude for seeing images, a desire to be outdoors in the landscape, skills with a pencil, skills with a brush, but these are all things that can be developed. And they are developed by being aware of them and practicing them consciously. Now, this may sound a bizarre thing to say, but I am going to show you, in the context of landscape painting, how to become more talented. Now, when we learn to draw, one of the things that we are often told is that the quality of our drawing is directly proportional to our observation skills. And that's absolutely true. The reason why people struggle to draw is because they are not looking carefully enough at the subject they're trying to draw. And on top of that, what you've got up here is often telling you something slightly different from what you're seeing. And we are unable to deal with optical illusions. And so we end up drawing something that is not quite right. Now, when we move into painting, there seems to be less emphasis on the requirement for careful observation. I don't think this should be the case. If we want to paint well, we must observe well. And I'm going to show you how to do that. I'm going to give you some ideas for the things that you should be looking for the moment you step outside your front door. And it doesn't even matter whether you're in the landscape itself with a sketchbook or with an easel set up. You could be sitting on the train or in the passenger seat of a car and just looking out of the window as you go through the landscape. I do this all the time. Unfortunately, I do it sometimes when I'm driving, which is dangerous. Don't do that. But when you have an opportunity to look at the landscape, what is it you're looking for? Let me give you some ideas. Now, I'm just going to set up the laptop and show you some paintings that I've done and how these are examples of what I look at when I'm in the landscape, the things that capture my attention, the things that I'm always looking out for, the things that I love to see when I'm outdoors, the things that make me want to share what I've seen with others. Okay, so let's have a look at this painting of the River Arun and Arundel Castle in the background. I've put this one to the top of the list because for me, this is the first thing that I see when I'm outdoors in the landscape. And it often dictates the reason for being in the landscape at certain times of the day. And it's colour. Although it's a cool, frosty day, you can see with these distant trees here and the sort of icy look to the water, there's some pale sunlight hitting the banks here. It's early morning. Colour on the fence here. It's all subtle, it's all pale. But then there's this red boat. You can see it here. Without this red boat, it's an entirely different painting. And for me, it makes the image. Many watercolour painters aren't quite so interested in colour. But for me, it is the thing that I see more than anything when I'm in the landscape. It's what my landscape looking is all about. Soft, muted hues, strong accent colours, strong directional light that picks out warm hues here and puts them against cool hues, as we've got in the river here. These are the things that I look for when I'm in the landscape. And there's no reason for it. It's just that that's what triggers my imagination and my sense of enjoyment from being in the landscape. Well, the second thing that captures my attention when I'm in the landscape is drama. And that can come in many different shapes and guises. It can be atmospheric conditions. It can be a dramatic coastline, as we've got here at Handfast Point. I know that the Old Harry Rocks here, taken from this drone shot that my friend Pete took, are dramatic. And they make for a wonderful composition when you're standing up here on Handfast Point. But we knew that they were going to look spectacular with the drone out here looking back towards the headland, and we had the light over this part of the water here, and the scene has a tremendous amount of drama to it. I like that. I look for scenes like this that have drama. The next thing to look out for is detail. And I don't mean just a very detailed scene, but actually landscape details themselves as the subject. So this little sketch that I did was just in my back garden, and I was sitting out on the patio. It was a beautiful morning, and there was some comma butterflies and bees all enjoying this lavender. And I liked the way that the hedge was dark behind it with these grasses in front. That's what I wanted to paint. That's what I was looking at. I was dialed into the detail. I made a few little notes up here. Butterflies, random jerky flight patterns. Bees, they're more methodical and industrious. I mean, butterflies, I've no idea what they do all day. They just go here, there and everywhere. No apparent plan whatsoever. But the bees, totally different. You can see they're on a mission. They've got something important to do. So don't think it's just about the big views in landscape painting. Zoom out, for sure, but zoom in as well. And when you're looking carefully at the landscape, when you are landscape looking, you'll see these little things and think, hey, do you know what? Why not paint it? It looks good. Moving on, try and identify and look out for shapes in the landscape. Now this is good old Corfe Castle, wonderful subject to paint. But one thing that struck my attention as I was looking at this scene is it's full of triangles and rectangles. The triangles are everywhere. You've got them on the gables here. You can see them even on top of those little dormer windows. This is a big triangle up here. And I thought, well, that makes a rather nice study against all these rectangles. This is a painting about rectangles and triangles. Have a look at shapes. It's not what normally inspires me, and there are artists far better than I am at zooming in on big shapes, whether they're tonal, whether they are geometric. It's not my thing so much, but try and keep an eye out for them, because if you can present a painting that is a play on shapes, or you can identify shapes and use those to build your composition, then that's a very powerful thing to do. So keep an eye out for those as well. Well, what else should we be looking out for in the landscape? Contrast. This painting of London, the River Thames, St Paul's Cathedral, Blackfriars train station just there. It's a wonderful scene lit up by the evening sun. And it throws up a number of different contrasts. Of course, we've got tonal contrasts here. You can see the dark of that office building behind the little booth here, which is for the river taxi where that pulls up. Strong contrast here between the white of this building and the platform shelters on Blackfriars Station. But there are other contrasts going on here. You have the River Thames, which is fluid, which is always changing, and then St Paul's Cathedral, which has just stood for centuries as a solid icon of London's skyline. Two entirely different concepts, solidity, fluidity. Then we also have old and new. We've got these Route Master buses going across the bridge. New transport method, same with this horrible, ugly canopy to Blackfriars Station. New transport. But we've got old transport, this old rusting hulk of a Thames barge just moored up here in the foreground. That to me is a lovely contrast to explore. Always be looking out for contrasts if you can. There are other artists far more capable than I am that are able to spot these strong tonal contrasts and stitch shapes together that have similar tonal values, and I can see the importance of that. I'm not very good at it because it's just not what I tend to see when I'm in the landscape. I zoom in on the colours, I zoom in on the details. But that may not be the case for you. Look for big shapes, look for contrasts, not just tonal, but can be ideological as well. Well, this is the final idea that I think is good to help you inform your painting, and that is to look for stories in the landscape. Here there's a very strong story to be told, and this old telephone box was at Balcombe train station close to where I live, and I used to get off the train there and I'd walk past this old phone box. It hadn't been used for years. Oddly enough, the receiver was still hanging up, And it's light worked, and it just created this lovely glow inside of an evening. But the whole thing had been overrun by brambles and ivy, and it just looked wonderfully picturesque. The reds, the greens, the idea that this man-made structure was being reclaimed by the landscape. The landscape always wins. Nature will always get the upper hand, and I rather liked this. And the peeling paint, it told a story of transition, and I liked that. And that's what this painting is about. So keep your mind open to stories. It can be people in the landscape. I don't paint people in the landscape that often, but there's no reason why you shouldn't. Be open to stories like this. They make wonderful subjects to paint.
Well, that's enough of looking at pictures. Let's get outdoors and do some proper landscape looking. And here I am in the lane, but having spent so much time talking and looking through pictures, the weather's not quite as crisp and clear as it was. And in fact, there's just been a quick shower, but that's okay. That's not going to put me off. Let's get out here and do some landscape looking. Well, there we are, the sun's out now, so I think we're back in business. Well, it doesn't take me too long to find inspiration when I'm in the landscape, and this rather nice pile of logs is no exception. There used to be an old Dutch barn here. It was a little bit dilapidated, very dilapidated actually, but it had a sort of rustic charm to it, as farm buildings often have, and I think what I'm sitting on came down in a recent gale and went straight through the roof, and so it's no longer here, which it's a bit of a shame, but hey, you know, that's what happens in the landscape. Things change, and that presents us with new subjects and new opportunities. That's just nature's way of keeping us interested. I just want you to think a little bit about this funny term, landscape looking. And for me, it's rather like changing gears, whether you're on a bicycle, in the car, whatever it is. When I'm outdoors in the landscape, I feel as though I'm cycling through 4 separate gears whenever I look at subjects in front of me. And the first is inspiration, and I find it ever so easy to be inspired when I'm in the landscape. Painting is secondary to a certain extent, because that's just a way of me explaining my feelings, my experience. I rarely go out and think, okay, I need to find something to paint, so I'll take a walk and see if anything inspires me. It just doesn't happen that way round. I'm outside because I want to be in the landscape. I find the inspiration comes quickly, and then it's a case of making sketches and paintings at the time or later in the studio. But when you're outdoors and you're in the countryside and you're in front of some potential subjects, immediately ask yourself the question, what is it about what I'm looking at that's inspiring me? Is it the colours? Is it the contrast? Is it the story? Is it those ideas that we just looked at? Keep that at the front of your mind when you're looking at your subject, and never lose sight of it right until you put your brush or your pencil down when you've finished. And then while I'm out, I slip quickly into second gear, and that is observation. It's about looking ever so intently at your subject. Look at it again, for as many times as you need until you're confident that you understand it and that you're going to be able to present it in a way that will be compelling to those that view your art, or helps you to feel as though you have captured what it is you want to say. And what this means is that you might be looking at a hedgerow, for example, and you can see that there's some sunlit twigs and branches sticking out of the top of it that are highlighted against the shadow on the field behind. And then you may walk a couple of paces up the lane and notice that actually it's the other way round. You have areas where the field behind is sunlit and the brambles and twigs and whatever it is in the hedgerow are almost silhouetted in front of it. But you've got to be observing carefully to notice these things. That's all part of landscape looking. And the third gear is presentation. When I'm in the landscape and I'm in front of a subject, all of a sudden I start putting a frame around what I see and asking myself, what is the best way that I can present this particular subject? Is it a traditional landscape format perhaps, or maybe a square or a panorama, or even a portrait format where there may be some focus on the foreground detail? And I start looking at shapes and composition and thinking about what the best arrangement is that's going to enable me to communicate clearly what it is that I'm trying to paint, what it is that I'm trying to say about the landscape and my experience of being in it. And in the next few modules of the course, we'll be looking at this in a lot more detail, and I'll be showing you the options and how we come to make those decisions and little tricks and tips that will help you with presentation and composition of the subjects that inspire you. And then we slip into the fourth and final gear, which is modification. I start looking at the subject in front of me and thinking, okay, well, I wonder if I just moved that tree out the way slightly, or perhaps included some fence posts, which you know I'm rather keen to do. And this is the whole point of what we're doing, because it's a creative exercise. We're not involved in copying, we're creating, we're making art. So we start to modify the scene in front of it and ask ourselves questions. Can I make some improvements with regard to the lighting? Are there things that I can do to simplify it so that the message isn't lost and that viewers won't be confused by what they're looking at? So this is what I mean by landscape looking. This is what goes through my mind when I'm outdoors in the countryside. And it's all very intuitive now. I don't really think about it in terms of these four gears, but I've mentioned them because they may help you to have some sort of structure to your thinking when you're standing in front of the subjects that you're interested in painting. And like I said, we'll look at them in a lot more detail in the forthcoming tutorials. Well, the sun's come out quite nicely now, so I think I'm going to wander further down the lane and see what other subjects there are to inspire me. Just stop and take a look at this beautiful copse of trees. It's catching the afternoon sunlight. It's revealing some branches and some boughs to be highlighted. They are coming towards us. We can see the underneath of those. We can see branches going away from us. Some in shade as they sit behind other boughs in the tree. The more you look at it, the more information is there. Landscape looking, observe carefully. Dial in as much detail as you possibly can. Your painting skills are only going to come through high quality observation. I'm just walking past this mountain ash tree, or rowan tree as it's sometimes called. And because I've got my landscape looking switched on, I don't just walk past it. I notice it's chock full of these gorgeous red berries. Yeah, if you ever wanted something to use your crimson alizarin for, then perhaps this is it. And this is what landscape looking is. Seeing colour, seeing detail, observing it, being inspired by it. Whenever I come down this lane, I always come here to keep an eye on my favourite oak tree. And here it is, it's reflected in this puddle in the field, which would actually make some fantastic foreground. There she is. Absolutely magnificent. Don't get many better trees than that. And because I'm serious about my landscape looking, I'm no longer just looking at the tree. I'm considering possible compositions. My eyes are no longer round, they've become rectangles, and I'm using them as viewfinders, and I'm thinking about how we can get the best composition to capture this, because this puddle in the foreground is fantastic. And don't let me fool you into thinking this is the only nice oak out here. Oh no. Take your pick. Now I'm completely engaged by this subject. I've found a new puddle. I've got a different perspective on the tree, and I've only moved 20 yards. And this, my friends, is what landscape looking is all about. Inspiration and observation. And I'm thinking about the boundaries, I'm thinking about the perspective, I'm thinking about what I need to include and what I need to omit if I want to make a sketch or a painting of this subject. I'm not doing that right now, but it's what I'm thinking, it's what I'm engaged in, it's landscape looking. In my mind, I had zoomed out, I was taking in as much of that puddle and the oak tree as I possibly could, but now I've zoomed in because I've noticed this wonderful lichen growing on the fence post here. It's beautiful. It would make a wonderful sketch or a study in its own right. The post itself is just catching the sun, and it's just a wonderful subject. Right there. Totally unplanned. So there you are, folks. That's a bit of impromptu landscape looking. Just a walk down the lane, but hopefully it gives you an idea of the things that I look at and the things that engage me when I'm outside in the landscape. Do this as often as you possibly can, and what you'll start to find is that recurring themes start to happen, and you'll be drawn to subjects and atmospheres, places, and you will find repeated sources of inspiration and subjects. What starts to give your work a cohesive feel to it. And you're starting to express your views on the landscape and what you felt while you were in it. You're starting to create proper art. Well, I'm going to head back up the lane now, and I'm going to show you a few more paintings that I've done, some of Sussex, some of Dorset, and you'll see that there is a recurring theme in terms of subjects, in terms of ideas, places, details, and all this comes from this habit of landscape looking, of enjoying being outdoors, but knowing what it is I want to see, knowing what it is I want to look at. Invariably, it's trees. It's the golden hour. It's when the sun is raking across the landscape and revealing a little bit of detail, some nice warm highlights, some cool shadows. It's what I like. It's what I want to look at. It's what I observe. And that's why you find it in my paintings. Get into the habit of landscape looking yourself, and you will start to find the same cohesion and continuity in your body of work.
Now, with those broader ideas in mind, I find myself going out into the landscape, and unless there's a particular iconic subject or a specific landmark that I want to paint, I keep my mind open to any particular subject that may take my interest. But looking at these, invariably, it's often the same thing. And that's what gives my work, and can give your work, a sense of consistency. Let's have a look at some paintings from Sussex, where I live, and I'll just talk you through quickly the subjects that I see, and I just end up painting over and over again. Oak trees, Sussex oaks. It's almost impossible to walk outside without seeing them, but I always look for them, and I know that there are certain around where I live that have got wonderful shapes and look fantastic at certain times of the day. That's why there's a lot of oak trees in my paintings. Here on the Ashdown Forest, we're back to colours again. Golden hour, colours just before sunset, and you can see the low sun raking across the landscape here with these gorgeous red hues in the background, or in the middle distance I should say, and these nice warm ochre tones on the forest floor. Lots of colour in the sky, and the sun catching this gorgeous Scots pine tree here. It's what I like to see. It's what gets me outdoors. I love being in the landscape at this time of the day. This is what I see. This is what I paint. And I observe these colours carefully, matching the different colour temperatures of cooler and warmer tones, presenting those accurately and carefully in a painting. That's important. But you're never going to be able to do it unless you are developing all the time your art of landscape looking, seeing these colours, understanding them, realising what you need to do in order to make a painting like this. Fence posts. They crop up in so many of my paintings. I absolutely love painting them. This wonderful old post and rail fence, just framing this gorgeous view down across the Weald. I love it. I just love painting these type of structures. I don't really know why. There's no deep philosophical reason why I do it. They just seem to work, and they help me to understand certain compositions. It's a landscape detail that I always see, and look closely at them, understand the way that these things are put together, and make them a subject in and of themselves. Log piles, it's another one. I love painting these, and this little sketch actually isn't in Sussex. This was down in Dorset, but I was just wandering down a lane, and there they were. They'd been there quite a while, and some ivy and moss had started to grow across them, and they're just so full of character, and it just makes for a wonderful quick sketch. But you've got to be walking down the lane with your eyes open, looking for these things. You've got to be developing your landscape looking, or you'll just walk past these things and you don't see them. The subjects are always there. There's always something from which we can make art. Gates, stiles, well, fence posts again, if you like. It's another subject that I like to paint. It hints about transition and movement and progress and a journey through the landscape. And I like these little apertures that allow us to move from here through to here. And they've always been part of the walks that I've done. And I'm drawn to these charming little crafted structures in the landscape. It's very easy to get here and just see this wonderful view along Fulking Escarpment on the South Downs, and you miss things like this. But if you've developed the art of landscape looking, you don't miss these things. They're there, you see them, you see the sun catching them, you see the lichen growing up them and the splits in the wood, and it just makes for a wonderful subject. Country lanes, again, impossible to escape these in Sussex, and I'm not complaining, by the way, but these are just wonderful to walk along, and if you're alert and observant, there's so much to see. There's deep shadows that fall across them. There's light that finds its way through gateways into fields. It allows the sun to come through and catch parts of the hedgerow. Some of the trees are highlighted, some of them are in shadows. And this is what landscape looking is all about. It's being out there, it's looking, it's observing, it's dialing into the things that you like and the things that interest you. Another thing that has crept increasingly frequently into my paintings is wildflowers. I just love them in the hedgerows and in the fields, often beside paths. We've got poppies here, some cow parsley, violets, cornflower. It's just beautiful, and I love walking through the South Downs, particularly where this is. And there's just such a variety of these wonderful little bursts of colour next to the path, and that inspires me. It's something that I like to paint. Again, if you walk too quickly through here, you miss them. If you have a developed sense of landscape looking, you're not only walking through the South Downs, you're stopping, you're observing what's happening at the side of the path and in front of the hedgerow, and it makes for a lovely subject. Now, I regularly paint down in Dorset too, and the overriding subject is the coast. And I love going for coastal walks. I love sitting on a beach. And every time I do that, I am developing my landscape looking all the time. And that has also led to a number of subjects that I like to paint. Let me run through them quickly. Wide open vistas like this. Love painting these. Open spaces, which you often get when you're at the coast. I love standing on the cliff top, seeing land and then sea and nothing. Compositionally, this is not ideal because your eye just goes and disappears out that side of the painting. Fantastic. I like that because that's exactly what I feel when I'm standing on a cliff top. I love that sense of space and escapism, and that's what I want to capture in this particular painting. Rocks and seaweed, wonderful subjects. These random shapes and the faces that catch the light and others that are cast into shadow, and then some of them covered with this almost unrealistically bright green seaweed, makes for a wonderful subject. Cliff faces, and there's plenty of these here at Durdle Door. There's Durdle Door itself, then this folded craggy cliff face here and here in the foreground too, each painted differently, each rendered with more or less detail throughout the painting as required. But I love looking at cliff faces, and they're full of interest. They're often full of seabirds and wildlife. They themselves make for fantastic subjects. Look closely at them. You'll start to see the cracks and areas that have slipped down, and they just become very interesting. But you've got to look at them. You've got to study them and make sense of them before you even think about painting them. Boats at low tide, another subject that I always seem to seek out. And I love looking at these because the boats are often at sort of slightly jaunty angles as the tide goes out and leaves them sitting on the sand. But there's another thing here that I love to include in my paintings, and it's these bright red pink buoys that mark moorings or fenders on the side of boats. I think they're fantastic, and they always find their way invariably into my coastal paintings. There you go, I've zoomed in on this one of Weymouth. They're all over the place. I love them, they're fantastic. They just add a nice splurge of colour into a painting, and I'm always looking out for them and always trying to find ways of including them. And last up, beaches and reflective sand. Wonderful subjects to paint. And again, it's very easy just to enjoy the beach here or wander into the town. But when you start to look carefully at subjects like this, and you can see the reflections of this building here in the wet sand on the edge of the beach, it just makes for a wonderful subject. Why wouldn't you want to paint that? But it's only when you're out there and you are engaged with the landscape and you are developing your sense of landscape looking that you notice little things like this. And you think, yes, that's exactly what I'm going to paint. Well, I hope that you found this little discussion helpful. Landscape looking is where the art is. Developing the art of landscape looking is what will help you to develop a body of work that has integrity and consistency. So when you're next out and about, keep some of these ideas in mind. Maybe watch the video again and make a few notes. I know it all sounds rather dry and academic and a little bit prosaic and very unartistic, but this is ultimately where the art comes from. And don't just scratch it off as talent that you don't have. No, you can become more talented. Get stuck in, get involved with your subjects. Look at them, observe carefully. I was out on a walk earlier in the year and I joked that I walk through the countryside all the time with rectangular eyes. It's as if I've got little viewfinders here or a little mount or mat cut out, and it's superimposed on my eyes and I'm just constantly looking for pictures. Well, that's a good thing if you want to progress as a landscape painter. So get out there and enjoy the landscape and develop the art of landscape looking. You'll become more talented if you do. Well, thanks ever so much for watching. Happy painting, and I look forward to seeing you soon.